My name is Sarah Collins. I'm 54 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've worked as a housekeeper in luxury homes across Rhode Island. My job has taught me one simple lesson. Expensive houses rarely hide expensive furniture, they hide expensive secrets. When my agency assigned me to Ashford Manor, everyone reacted the same way. You're lucky. The Ashfords were one of the wealthiest families on the East Coast. Their name appeared on museums, hospitals, university buildings, and charity foundations. To the outside world, they looked like the definition of success. The mansion sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It was magnificent. Gray stone walls, towering oak trees, perfect gardens, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. Everything looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. And yet, the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. Not dangerous, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people instinctively lower their voices. William Ashford welcomed me himself. He was polite, soft-spoken, much friendlier than I expected. He showed me through the mansion room by room, the grand staircase, the ballroom, the library, the dining hall, guest suites, wine cellar. Everything was spotless. Then we reached the eastern hallway. William stopped walking. For the first time that morning, his smile disappeared. "The west side of the house is yours," he said. "The east wing is not." His voice remained calm, but it wasn't a request. "No one from the staff goes there." I glanced down the hallway. Heavy oak doors stood at the far end. Unlike the rest of the mansion, there were no paintings, no flowers, no rugs, only a long corridor ending in silence. "I understand," I replied. William nodded once. "We've kept it closed for many years." Then he continued the tour as though nothing unusual had happened. He never explained why. And I didn't ask. People with old money rarely explain their rules, but they always have reasons. During my first 2 weeks, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Victoria Ashford spent most of her time at charity events. Their daughter Emily visited almost every afternoon with her husband Nathan. Their son Michael appeared only occasionally. The staff worked quietly. Nobody gossiped. Nobody complained. It almost felt too perfect, until I noticed one detail. Every evening, exactly at 8 o'clock, the head housekeeper carried a silver dinner tray upstairs, not toward the family bedrooms, toward the locked east wing. Dinner, fresh flowers, a pot of tea, sometimes a book. 20 minutes later, she returned. The tray was always empty. No one ever mentioned it. One afternoon, while trimming roses near the greenhouse, I casually asked one of the gardeners if someone lived in that part of the house. He looked around before answering, then lowered his voice. "You'll learn very quickly not to ask about the East Wing." He smiled politely, picked up his tools, and walked away. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, a violent storm rolled in from the Atlantic. Lightning struck somewhere near the property. The power went out across the entire estate. Emergency lights flickered on. Staff members rushed through the halls, checking generators and windows. For the first time since I'd arrived, Ashford Manor no longer looked calm. It looked vulnerable. I was closing the library windows when I heard a loud mechanical click behind me. I turned. One section of the enormous bookshelf had moved. Only a few inches, just enough to reveal a narrow opening hidden inside the wall. Then I heard someone cough, a woman's cough, coming from behind the secret passage, and in that moment I realized the east wing wasn't empty. Someone had been living there all along. For several seconds, I simply stood there. The hidden passage was no wider than a hallway in an old hotel. Soft yellow lights glowed along the stone walls. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood. Someone was living here, not years ago, now. Another quiet cough echoed from somewhere ahead. I should have turned around. Every instinct told me to leave, close the passage, and pretend I had never found it. Instead, I took one slow step forward, then another. The corridor ended at a single white wooden door. Unlike the rest of the mansion, it wasn't grand or decorative. It looked ordinary, almost comforting. The cough came again, closer this time. I gently knocked, no answer. I waited, still nothing. My hand rested on the brass handle. I pushed the door open. The room looked nothing like I expected. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a forgotten storage room. It was a cozy apartment. Books lined the walls. Fresh flowers stood on the windowsill. A fireplace crackled quietly. A knitted blanket rested across a comfortable armchair. Near the window sat an elderly woman reading a novel. She looked up as if she'd been expecting me all morning. She smiled, not with surprise, with recognition. "So," she said softly, "you're the new housekeeper." I couldn't find my voice. She closed the book on her lap. "I've been wondering when we'd finally meet." My heart was pounding. "You knew I was here?" She nodded. "Mrs. Harper told me someone new had started." She studied my face for a moment. "You look frightened." I glanced around the room again. Nothing about it suggested captivity. There were photographs, fresh fruit, music playing quietly from an old radio. Everything was clean, comfortable, lived in. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I wasn't trying to come in here." "I know." Her voice was calm. "Nobody ever tries." She motioned toward the chair across from her. "You've already broken the biggest rule in this house." I hesitated, then sat down. She poured tea into a porcelain cup. Her hands were steady. "You must have 1,000 questions." "I do." She smiled. "But you're not asking the right one." I frowned. "What should I ask?" She looked toward the fireplace. "You should ask why an entire family pretends a room like this doesn't exist." Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked, "Does Mr. Ashford know you're here?" A faint smile appeared. "Oh, Sarah, he knows better than anyone." Something about the way she answered made my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, she picked up a framed photograph from the table. She handed it to me. It showed a much younger William Ashford standing beside a beautiful woman with dark hair. They looked happy. Newly married, perhaps. The woman beside him looked familiar, very familiar. But I couldn't understand why. "I've seen this face before," I whispered. The elderly woman smiled gently. "You have? Where?" "Downstairs." I looked at her, confused. "In the family photographs?" She nodded. "But you'll never find my name." I stared at the picture, then back at her. "I don't understand." "Not yet." She leaned back in her chair. "For 23 years, everyone outside this room has believed the same story." "What story?" "That I died." The words hung in the air. I searched her face for some sign that she was joking. There was none. "My funeral was held in this town." She spoke quietly. "People cried. Newspapers wrote about the tragedy. There was even a memorial service." I felt a chill run through my body. But I struggled to find the words. "You're sitting right here." "Yes." She smiled sadly. "I've had a lot of time to think about the irony." Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere inside the passage. The woman's expression changed immediately. "You need to go." "Who is it?" "Mrs. Harper. You'll get her into trouble." She stood and gently walked me toward the door. Before I left, I turned back one last time. "I still don't know your name." She looked directly into my eyes. "My name is Caroline." She paused. "And if you want to understand why I've lived behind a hidden door for 23 years, her smile disappeared. "Don't ask William." She slowly closed the door. "Ask Michael." I hurried back through the hidden corridor just as the bookshelf began sliding shut. When I stepped into the library, it was as though nothing had happened. The shelves stood perfectly in place. The mansion was silent once again. But now I knew something no visitor, no neighbor, and perhaps not even every member of the Ashford family knew. Someone the world believed was dead was quietly living inside the house. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hidden room, the fireplace, the books, the photographs, and Caroline calmly saying that the world believed she had died. None of it made sense. The next morning, I arrived at Ashford Manor determined to act as though nothing had happened. If Caroline had survived inside that house for 23 years, there was only one way she could have done it. Someone had protected her, someone inside the family. The question was, who? The house looked exactly as it always did. William was reading the newspaper in the breakfast room. Victoria was speaking on the phone about a charity fundraiser. Emily had arrived early with Nathan to discuss renovation plans for one of the guest cottages. Everything looked perfectly normal, but I had stopped believing appearances. As I dusted the library shelves, I caught William watching me. Not openly, just long enough to make me wonder whether he somehow knew where I had been the night before. When our eyes met, he smiled, the same calm smile, the same polite voice. "Everything all right, Sarah?" "Of course." He nodded and returned to his newspaper. But for the first time since I'd met him, I had the strange feeling that he wasn't studying the headlines. He was studying me. Around noon, Michael arrived unexpectedly. Unlike everyone else in the family, he never seemed interested in the mansion. He parked an old pickup truck beside a row of luxury cars, carried a small duffel bag inside, and quietly greeted the staff by name. When he saw me in the hallway, he smiled. "You must be Sarah." "I am. I'm Michael." We shook hands. His grip was firm but relaxed. There was something different about him. No expensive watch, no tailored suit, no attempt to impress anyone. He looked more like a schoolteacher than the son of a billionaire. That afternoon, I found him sitting alone on the back terrace overlooking the ocean. He was repairing an old wooden birdhouse, not scrolling through his phone, not making business calls, just quietly sanding a piece of cedar. I almost walked past. Then I remembered Caroline's last words: "Don't ask William, ask Michael." I took a deep breath. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" He smiled. Not at all. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question as casually as I could. "Have you lived here your whole life?" "Most of it. You must know every corner of this house." His hands stopped moving, only for a second. Then he continued sanding the wood. "Most corners." His answer was careful, very careful. I decided to take a chance. "What about the east wing?" The sandpaper stopped completely. Michael looked out toward the ocean. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he quietly asked, "Who told you about it?" "No one." He looked at me, really looked at me. "You went there." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Michael slowly set the birdhouse on the table, then sighed. I was wondering how long it would take. My heartbeat quickened. "You know who's there." Another long silence. Finally, he nodded. "Yes." "Who is she?" He rubbed his forehead. If I answered that question, he stopped himself. Everything changes. The wind carried the sound of waves crashing below the cliffs. Michael leaned back in his chair. "When I was 12 years old, my father told me that some secrets aren't kept because people are cruel." He looked toward the mansion. "They're kept because everyone involved believes they're protecting someone." I frowned. "Is that what's happening here?" "I honestly don't know anymore." His voice sounded tired, as though he'd been carrying the same burden for years. Before I could ask another question, Emily stepped onto the terrace. "There you are," she called. "The lawyer's waiting." Michael stood immediately. As he walked past me, he paused. Without looking back, he quietly said, "If Caroline asked you to come back—" He hesitated. "Go." Then he disappeared into the house. I remained alone on the terrace, staring at the ocean. For the first time since entering Ashford Manor, I realized something. No one seemed afraid of Caroline. No one wanted to hurt her, but everyone, including Michael, was terrified of the truth. Later that evening, just before leaving, I noticed something unusual. Mrs. Harper wasn't carrying the usual dinner tray. Instead, she was carrying a small wooden box. It looked old, almost antique. She disappeared into the east wing as she always did. 20 minutes later, she came back empty-handed. The next morning, the box was gone, and so was the photograph that had been sitting beside Caroline's chair. Someone had started moving pieces, and I had the feeling the game was finally beginning. The next morning, Ashford Manor felt different. Not because anything had changed, because now I noticed things I had ignored before. William seemed distracted during breakfast. Victoria barely touched her coffee. Emily kept checking her phone every few minutes. Only Michael appeared calm. Too calm. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Around 10, Mrs. Harper approached me in the laundry room. She spoke quietly. "Miss Caroline would like to see you." My heart skipped. She didn't wait for an answer. She simply walked away. A few minutes later, I found myself standing once again before the hidden door. This time, Caroline was waiting. She smiled warmly. "I wasn't sure you'd come back. I almost didn't." "I know." She poured tea into 2 cups. "I imagine Michael spoke to you." "He did. And?" "He said everyone believes they're protecting someone." Caroline lowered her eyes. "That's exactly what William has told himself for 23 years. I studied her face. She looked peaceful, not frightened, not imprisoned, only lonely. "Why are you really here?" I finally asked. She looked out the window toward the ocean. Because leaving would destroy too many lives. I frowned. I don't understand. You will. She walked to an old oak cabinet and removed a worn leather photo album. She placed it gently on the table. Open it. The first pages showed a young William. Business meetings, vacations, family celebrations. Then I turned another page. There she was, Caroline, standing beside William, holding a little boy. I looked closer. The boy couldn't have been older than 4. Dark hair, serious eyes. Something about him felt familiar. I turned another page. The same child. Birthday party, Christmas morning, learning to ride a bicycle. Then suddenly, the photograph stopped. The rest of the album contained nothing, blank pages. I looked up. Who is the little boy? Caroline smiled sadly. You've spoken with him. A chill ran through me. No. She nodded. Yes. Michael? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everything suddenly shifted inside my mind. Michael wasn't simply William's son. He was Caroline's son. I struggled to find words. But everyone says Victoria is his mother. They believe that. Is she? Caroline slowly shook her head. No. The room became completely silent. My son was only 6 years old when the world was told I had died. I couldn't speak. He was told I loved him. He was told I had become very sick. He was told I would never come home. Tears gathered in her eyes for the first time. But he wasn't told the whole truth, I whispered. Did he know you were here? Caroline nodded. Eventually. When? He found me by accident, just like I had. He was 12. What did he do? She smiled through her tears. He hugged me. The answer broke my heart. He didn't ask questions? Oh, he had hundreds. But the first thing he said was, she paused. I knew you couldn't really leave me. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why didn't you tell everyone? Caroline closed the album. Because William begged me not to. And you agreed? I loved him. She looked toward the fireplace. And sometimes love convinces us that silence is kindness. A knock echoed softly through the hidden hallway. Mrs. Harper entered. Her face looked unusually tense. She rarely showed emotion. Today, she did. He's asking for you. Caroline immediately stood. William? Mrs. Harper nodded. He says it's time. Caroline looked at me. For a moment, she seemed uncertain. Then she reached for my hand. Sarah. Her voice trembled. Whatever happens after today. She hesitated. Please remember that not every secret begins with betrayal. I watched as she disappeared with Mrs. Harper through another hidden door I hadn't noticed before. I remained alone in the room. The photo album still lay open on the table. One loose photograph had slipped onto the floor. I picked it up. It showed William, Caroline, and little Michael standing together on the beach. Across the bottom, someone had written a date, June 1999, exactly 3 weeks before Caroline's reported death. As I stared at the photograph, one question refused to leave my mind. If Caroline had never died, then whose funeral had the entire town attended? I couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. June 1999, 3 weeks before Caroline's funeral. If the date was real, then everything the town believed had been built on a lie. The next morning, Ashford Manor was unusually busy. 2 attorneys arrived before breakfast. An accountant followed shortly after. William spent nearly the entire morning inside his study. The atmosphere throughout the house was tense. Everyone seemed to sense that something important was happening. Around noon, Michael found me in the garden. You were with her yesterday. It wasn't a question. Yes. He looked relieved. I think she trusts you. I don't understand why. Michael smiled faintly. Neither do I. He sat on a stone bench overlooking the sea. My father asked me to come today. Why? He wants the whole family here tonight. For dinner? Michael slowly shook his head. No, for the truth. Those words stayed with me all afternoon. Around 6 o'clock, every member of the family arrived. Victoria, Emily, Nathan, the attorneys, Mrs. Harper, even the family doctor. It didn't feel like a dinner. It felt like a meeting no one wanted to attend. William entered the library looking weaker than I had ever seen him. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down. I don't have much time, he said quietly. The room fell silent. I've spent 23 years protecting a decision that no longer deserves protection. Emily frowned. Dad, what are you talking about? William looked toward Mrs. Harper. She gave a small nod and quietly left the room. A minute later, the library doors opened again. Caroline walked inside. No one moved. Victoria slowly stood from her chair. Her face turned pale. Emily stared as though she had seen a ghost. Nathan whispered, "This can't be possible." William spoke first. "It is." Silence filled the room. Finally, Victoria found her voice. "Who is she?" William closed his eyes. "My wife." The room exploded with questions. "What? That's impossible. She died. We buried her." William raised his hand. "Please." Everyone became quiet again. "I let you believe she was dead." Emily looked horrified. "You lied to us." "I did." Michael remained completely still. He had heard most of this before. Victoria looked from William to Caroline, then back again. "For 23 years?" William nodded. "Yes." Tears rolled down Victoria's face. "Why?" William looked at Caroline before answering. "Because we believed it was the only way to protect our family." He explained everything: the diagnosis, the fear, the media attention, the staged disappearance, the private life Caroline chose after doctors believed she had little time left. No one interrupted. No one could. When he finished, the room remained silent for nearly a minute. Then Emily quietly asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why didn't you tell us after she recovered?" William looked down. "Because every year it became harder." He smiled sadly. "Eventually I became a prisoner of my own lie." Caroline stepped closer. "You weren't the only one." She looked at Victoria. "I made the same choice." Victoria wiped away her tears. "You knew about me." Caroline nodded. "From the beginning. And you stayed?" "I did." Victoria's voice broke. "I never wanted to replace anyone." "I know." Caroline walked toward her. "I've never blamed you." The two women stood facing one another. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria did something no one expected. She embraced Caroline. Both women cried, not because they were enemies, because they had both lost 23 years to the same secret. Michael quietly turned toward the window. Emily sat down, unable to speak. Nathan lowered his eyes. William simply watched. For the first time since I had met him, he looked at peace. Then he reached into his jacket and handed a sealed envelope to Benjamin Carter. "My final instructions." Benjamin opened it. Inside was a revised will. William had already divided his estate months earlier. No one had been disinherited. No one had been punished. Instead, he had written one final sentence beneath his signature: "A family built on love should never have to compete for what was always enough." I thought the evening was over. It wasn't. Benjamin looked up from the papers. "There is one more document." Everyone looked at him. He slowly removed another envelope. "This one," he paused, "was written by Caroline." She looked surprised. "I gave you that years ago." Benjamin nodded. "You instructed me to destroy it unless Mr. Ashford asked otherwise." William smiled weakly. "I changed my mind." Caroline suddenly looked nervous. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed afraid. Benjamin carefully broke the seal. "I believe everyone deserves to hear this." And as he unfolded the first page, I realized there was still one secret inside Ashford Manor that no one, not even Michael, had ever heard. No one spoke as Benjamin Carter unfolded the letter. Caroline stared at the pages with visible unease. "I wrote that more than 20 years ago," she said quietly. "I never expected anyone to read it." William gave her a gentle smile. "I think they deserve to know." Benjamin nodded and began. "To my family. If you're hearing these words, then the secret we've protected for so many years has finally come to an end. Everything that happened was my decision." William never forced me. He begged me to stay. I was the one who chose to disappear. At the time, I truly believed I was dying. The doctors couldn't promise me another year. I couldn't bear the thought of Michael watching me slowly forget his name. I wanted him to remember me smiling, not suffering, so I chose to become a memory instead of a burden. Victoria quietly wiped away tears. Emily lowered her head. Michael never took his eyes off the letter. Benjamin continued, but life had other plans. The illness stopped progressing. The woman who expected only months was suddenly given years, then more years. Every morning I wanted to walk downstairs. Every birthday I wanted to hug my son. Every Christmas I wanted to sit beside my family. But every year the truth became more difficult to explain. One lie became another. until we no longer knew how to escape it. The room was silent except for Benjamin's voice. He turned the final page. Please don't blame William. If anyone deserves forgiveness, it is me. And if anyone deserves a second chance, it is every person in this room. Don't waste another day living inside a story that no longer belongs to us. Benjamin folded the letter. No one moved. Finally, Michael stood. He slowly walked across the library. For 23 years, he had spoken to Caroline only in secret. Now, for the first time, everyone watched. He wrapped his arms around her. I've waited half my life to do that without hiding. Caroline began to cry. So have I. Victoria stepped closer. I don't know where this leaves us. Caroline smiled through her tears. It leaves us with the truth. Emily walked toward her next. I was raised believing you were a photograph. Caroline gently touched her hand. Now I'm simply another member of your family. Even Nathan, who had barely spoken all evening, quietly said, I don't think anyone here knows what the right reaction is. William gave a tired laugh. I've had 23 years to think about it. The room smiled for the first time that day. A week later, William passed away peacefully. This time there were no secrets, no hidden rooms, no false stories. At the memorial service, Caroline sat in the front row beside Michael and Victoria. Many guests whispered in confusion. Others recognized her from photographs taken decades earlier. Questions spread quickly, but the family answered every one of them with honesty. There was no longer anything to hide. Over the following months, Ashford Manor changed completely. The hidden passage behind the library bookshelf was permanently sealed, not because anyone wanted to hide the past again, because there was no reason for it anymore. Caroline moved into the small cottage overlooking the ocean that William had renovated years earlier. She planted roses around the porch. Michael visited every weekend. Victoria often joined them for tea. Emily brought her children, who never understood why everyone thought Grandma Caroline was such a surprise. To them, she had simply always been there. As for Mrs. Harper, she finally retired after nearly 40 years of service. On her last day, Caroline hugged her for a long time. You kept my promise. Mrs. Harper smiled gently. I kept your hope. I continued working as a housekeeper. Eventually, I accepted jobs in other homes, but I never forgot Ashford Manor. People often believe that the biggest secrets are hidden because someone is evil. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes secrets begin with love and survive because no one knows how to undo the choices they made in fear. When I first walked into that mansion, I thought I was cleaning another wealthy family's home. Instead, I walked into 23 years of silence. A silence built by fear, protected by loyalty, and finally broken by truth. The hidden room behind the library is gone now. If you visited the house today, you would never know it had existed. But every time I pass that stretch of coastline, I remember one thing Caroline told me during our last conversation. She looked out at the Atlantic, smiled, and said, the hardest door to open wasn't the one behind the bookshelf. I asked her what she meant. She looked at her family laughing together in the garden. It was the door back to my own life. And I think that's true for many people. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't discovering a secret. It's deciding that you're finally ready to stop living inside one.